I once believed that if you poured your heart into love, gave everything you had and showed up consistently, those closest to you, especially your own child, would always cherish it. But life has a cruel way of showing you where you truly stand, often at the most painful moments. My name is Daniel Harper, 48, and this is a tale of devotion, betrayal, and the cost of self-respect. 24 years ago, I married the woman I thought I'd share my twilight years with, Laura. She was radiant, fiercely driven, and had a laugh that could brighten any room. We welcomed our daughter, Sophie, 2 years later, and for a time, life felt like a perfect picture. But somewhere along the way, things changed. Laura grew restless, craving more independence, more success, more of everything she felt our life lacked. I was grinding away as a project manager at a mid-sized construction company, working long hours to keep our family secure. I missed birthdays. I passed on vacations. I poured my energy into building a stable home. When Laura landed a big promotion at her advertising agency, it was as if our shared life no longer mattered to her. She wanted out. One evening, over a quiet dinner, she broke the news, calm, detached, like she'd practiced it. "I'm not fulfilled, Daniel. I haven't been for a long time. I need to find myself again." No cheating, no shouting, just a cold finality. I pleaded for therapy, but her mind was already elsewhere. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. She kept the house. I moved into a modest apartment 2 towns away. We agreed on shared custody, but it never felt equal. Sophie was just 12, and Laura slowly molded her world around her new reality. I became the weekend dad, showing up with groceries, helping with schoolwork, attending every recital, and covering my share of expenses, sometimes Laura's too. A year later, Laura introduced a new man into Sophie's life. Mark Reynolds, a polished finance director, wealthy, charismatic in a superficial way. He owned a yacht, took them on lavish trips, and showered Sophie with extravagant gifts. By 14, she started calling him M. It hurt, but I pushed it down. I focused on bonding with her in other ways, teaching her to drive, supporting her passion for environmental studies, and paying her entire college tuition without loans. Laura and Mark never contributed a cent. I never mentioned it. I just wanted Sophie to feel secure. Over time, I felt my role shrink. I was no longer invited to father-daughter events because Mark had already signed up. I missed her graduation party because it was simpler to host it at Mark's house. Still, I told myself it was temporary. She's young. She'll come back to me. Then came the wedding. Sophie, now 25, got engaged to a decent guy named Ethan. She called me via video, beaming with joy, and I congratulated her, tears in my eyes. "I'll help with the wedding," I said before she could ask. Over the next few months, I covered the venue, her gown, the catering, even some decorations. I told her it was my privilege to give her the perfect day. She thanked me briefly, but never mentioned me walking her down the aisle. The invitation arrived, elegant, ivory with gold accents. On the back, under the ceremony details, it read, "Giving the bride away, Mr. Mark Reynolds." My name was nowhere to be found. A follow-up call casually informed me I'd be seated in the back row to keep things smooth between the families. I asked, "Why is Mark giving you away?" Silence. Then Sophie said, "He's been there, Dad, really there. And I don't want to upset Mom by making it a thing." "Really there?" I reminded her gently but firmly of the late-night calls during her finals, the bills I paid, the time I drove through a blizzard to pick her up when her car broke down. I mentioned how I never missed a birthday, even if I celebrated it alone with her a day early. She sighed. "Dad, can't you just be okay with this? It's my day, not yours." I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I said, "Thanks for telling me." On her wedding day, I didn't go. I got calls, some furious, some puzzled. Laura texted, "Real classy, Daniel." Mark predictably said nothing, but Sophie's voicemail lingered. "Dad, I saw you weren't there. I hope you're okay. I thought you'd understand. I love you." I didn't respond. 3 months later, I buried myself in work, picked up fishing again, and read books I'd ignored for years. For the first time, I was living for myself. Then one December afternoon, Sophie appeared at my door. She looked older, uncertain, her eyes smudged with mascara. "Dad, I'm sorry." I let her in. She sat on the couch where she used to nap as a kid, watching cartoons. She apologized for choosing Mark, for sidelining me, for letting Laura shape her view of me for years. "I thought he cared," she said. "But when I mentioned a second degree, he told me to get loans. When Ethan and I fought, he told me to toughen up. He never showed up like you did." Her eyes filled with tears. "You always showed up, Dad." I nodded. I had. Then she said, "I want to fix this. I miss you." I looked at her, seeing every silent wound I'd carried, the missed holidays, the nights I cried alone, the love I gave without return. I stood, walked to the door, and said the hardest words of my life. I loved you more than anything, Sophie, but love can't survive without respect. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. Please don't come back. She didn't cry, not then. She stood in the doorway, hands shaking, as if she never thought I'd say no. But I did. Because sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is walk away from those who only return when their new foundation crumbles. As I shut the door, I felt peace, not victory, not vengeance, just peace. 3 weeks after Sophie left in tears, the quiet became familiar. I thought that was the end. But regret creeps in like fog, slow, heavy, inescapable. One Sunday morning, coffee in hand, book open, I heard 3 soft knocks. I knew before I opened the door. Laura and Sophie stood there like echoes from a life I'd closed off. Laura, in a dark coat, looked weary. Sophie stared at the ground, clutching her sleeve. "Daniel," Laura said, her voice cautious. "Can we talk?" I paused, then let them in. They sat stiffly on the couch, the same one where Laura once rocked Sophie to sleep, where I grieved alone when they left. "Furniture holds memories," Laura began. "I owe you an apology." I leaned against the wall, silent, arms crossed. "I know what I did," she said. "I made Sophie think you weren't there for her. Mark wasn't better, he was just easier. I let him take a role that was yours." I raised an eyebrow. "You let him?" She swallowed. "I pushed it." Sophie shifted uncomfortably. Laura went on. "I was bitter after the divorce. I told myself you were why I was unhappy. I fed Sophie my resentment, wanting her to choose Mark to feel like I'd won. There it was, the truth, raw, overdue. "I saw you at the wedding," Laura said, her voice breaking. "In your truck outside the venue. You stayed there a while, didn't you?" I said nothing, just sipped my coffee. "I should have spoken to you then," she admitted, "but I was too proud. Now seeing Mark pull away from Sophie emotionally, she knows who was always there." Sophie spoke, her voice small. "Dad, I'm sorry I let Mom's words become mine. I thought I was doing right, but I see now, the only man who never asked for anything was the one I pushed aside." Her eyes were wet, her words sincere, but I was done. I set my coffee down. "The hardest part wasn't the wedding," I said, voice calm. "Not the money or the shame. It was realizing everything I gave, every sacrifice, every dollar, every missed chance in my life meant so little I became an afterthought." Laura wiped her eyes. "Daniel, we can't undo it, but maybe." I cut her off softly. "No, we can't, and we shouldn't pretend we can." I turned to Sophie. "I'll always love you, that won't change. But I've stopped burning myself to keep others warm." Her lips trembled. "Can we rebuild?" I walked to the door, opening it slowly. "You built something else. You called someone else Dad. You let someone else walk you into your new life while I sat outside. I think it's best I stay there." Laura stood. "Please, Daniel, you're a good man. I see that now. I hate that I made you feel replaceable." "I wasn't replaceable," I said. "You just didn't think I'd walk away." They stood at the door, hoping for a different ending, but I'd already written mine. "Take care," I said, closing the door, not with anger or spite, but with peace. Because sometimes walking away isn't quitting. It's choosing yourself at last.